Minga, and today we are going to talk a little bit on the 5 ways tardiness will affect K12 in 2024. And this is coming on the tail announcement of some things from the Biden-Harris administration, some announcements recently with regards to focus and funding on helping to dive into this. And we, really want to keep this interactive. So once again, welcome. Thanks so much for joining. I'm Jason, and you're here for the 5 ways tardiness will affect your school in 2024. I think I'm going to have to take over the host here. We'll be sans video here for a moment. There we go. That should be helpful there. Never ending, always having a video problem, isn't it? So hi there, everyone. I'm Jason. So quick, I always love to keep this interactive. So, we'll be asking for some comments. And of course, we can't see you. So, if you have questions, throw it up and you can use the questions. But honestly, I think it's usually easier if we just use the chat for questions as well. But your preference, if you want to use, and Yvonne has raised hand already. So thank you, Yvonne. And you can throw questions up in Q&A and chat, and May and Giuseppe from our team are here as well, and they'll be helping moderate the chat and things like that. And of course, this is being recorded today, so we will make this available to everyone after the meeting. So what prompted us from diving into this? And chat is disabled, so give you 1 second. And I will make the chat enabled. Thank you. Let's see where to make chat. Well, I don't even see where to make chat enabled on here, so we'll use the Q&A section for now. So, so go ahead and just throw comments up in questions and answers, and the Q&A section that is enabled. So we will keep things there for now. Sorry for the technical difficulties. So just a couple weeks ago, the Biden and Harris administration made some big announcements on a focus this year in K12 for improving their improving student achievement agenda that had a primary emphasis on tackling the issues with chronic absenteeism. It's probably not a surprise to everyone that's on the reason you're on the call here in the first place is we talk to nearly every middle and high school that we're engaged with in regardless of the platform or systems or solutions we're working with them on, list off tardiness and absenteeism as one of their biggest challenges. Overall as a school, biggest challenges that have the biggest impact on staff time, on school culture, on instruction time, even on the impact on the mental health and wellness of our staff and teachers. So shockingly, in the last few years, we've seen chronic absenteeism nearly double in the last 10 years. And in 2021 and 2022, the 2021-22 school year, chronic absenteeism hit a rate of 31% across the country. So, that's really a staggering number to think of, is that 31% of our students in middle and high school are suffering from chronic absenteeism right now. And on top of that, this year in 2024, they're projecting that 23 million students will have chronic absenteeism. So, it is huge numbers and huge challenges. And sometimes it's great to see stats like this, just from the perspective that if you feel like you're alone struggling in this problem today, you are not alone. Nearly every school around you is facing the same issues and is struggling with, how this is impacting their school community, their staff, and their students. So, it's a very real problem. It is across the country. We see it in schools of every size, in every demographic, in small rural schools and large urban schools and everything else in between. So there's a little bit of comfort in understanding that this is a systemic issue at the moment that we're working with, and not a local issue for you. And that makes it a little more approachable for us to talk about, because it's nobody's particular problem. And I guess the other way to look at it is, of course, it's everyone's particular problem. So today we're going to talk a little bit to help to generate some awareness for you. And these probably, will just help put some clarity around this on 5 key ways that this is affecting your school this year. So in summary, these 5 key ways that are really important to understand right out of the gate is, number 1, that unmanaged graduation rates are going to drop. There is a direct correlation between chronic absenteeism, well, I guess an inverse correlation between chronic absenteeism and graduation rates. So as absenteeism goes up and tardiness goes up, graduation rates, fall accordingly. And of course, that has, at the end of the day, we're all here to create healthy learning environments for students, to graduate students and set them up for success in the future. And so, right out of the gate, this is has a significant impact on one of the key objectives of why we're all here. A second reason that that is going to impact your school is, of course, the manual processes are going to sink your staff. And managing these problems across campus with the large volumes of students coming in late in the morning and being late to every class simply creates a lot of overhead process, not only for teachers in the classroom, but also for administration, dealing with a lot of these challenges, managing things like, consequences or progressive discipline frameworks, and, parent notifications and everything else in between. So we'll talk a lot more about those processes that, this issue really creates on campus, and how much time ends up being spent in there. As we get into the classroom environment, of course, as students stroll in late for the first 5, 10, or 15 minutes of class, it's extremely disruptive to our classroom learning environment. And this disruption to our classroom learning environment leads to and is related to a mass teacher exodus right now as well. Of course, this is, it's disruptive to the learning environment for the teachers. That's why teachers are there. They're there to work with students. They're there to teach. They're there to connect, engage, and build relationships with their students. And if that's being disrupted and they're simply managing attendance books and managing students through that process, it's going to have a strong and very negative impact on the quality of experience for our staff. And from that experience, we're going to continue to see an exodus of teachers. And sometimes, of course, it's the best ones that we're struggling with, because they're the ones that it emotionally impacts the most. And then, of course, in the big picture, if this continues, we're going to start missing LCAP goals. And this could start to have a negative impact on funding. So, of course, the Biden-Harris administration is making some announcements around helping that, so that we're not seeing, such short-term cycles between absenteeism, instruction hours, and LCAP funding. But long-term, it is going to be a problem, especially with the way that our funding bodies are set up right now, and our funding and reporting is set up right now. So we need to be very conscious of that as well, on how we are, tracking this data, how we're reporting on this data, and the impact that this is going to have overall. So did we get chat working by chance? Oh, there we go. Okay, I just turned chat on for everyone. So real quick, if everyone on the call would take a quick second, of these 5 things, could you just throw up in chat? And I just want to see a stream of these. Throw up in chat what you think, are some of the top concerns of these 5 items. Or are there any items here that are missing that are some of the top concerns that you're already thinking about? So go ahead and just throw into chat whenever you have a chance. And Naomi, yes, they will be shared. So I'm seeing manual processes is a big one for me. Brian's tardiness and disruptions. Classroom disruptions, grades and graduation rates, losing top talent, Charles, and in all caps, he's you're feeling that one. I hear you. Developing bad habits for future employment. Well, I mean, that's a funny one, right? As an employer, I can tell you that is a very real thing as well. So especially the work environment situations that we have with our younger staff that we're bringing on board. And, to that point, I mean, just talking about it as an employer in the tech industry, we interview specifically early, our early grads right now, to identify some of these chronic patterns that they may have developed that would likely lead to employment challenges. So that's a really interesting, really great point there. That's from Carl Carpenter. Yvonne saying the personnel that it keeps to keep the whole system running, graduation rates, lack of engagement, staff capacity to deal with tardiness, skipping classes, and then communication with families. Yeah, Marissa, hear you. So great points. Thanks everyone for sharing, and go ahead as things come up, just throw them in the chat, because we keep these chats and then we can collect that information and rebuild this content and presentations as well. So let's dive a little bit into this. More just like, seemingly shocking numbers that how high there are, starting with that 31% of students being chronically absent. But right now we are facing statistics that show 60% of students will not complete high school without early interventions for tardiness. So, I mean, another way to word this is 60% of our students will face an intervention process and program for tardiness before they graduate. And this is high school stats. So this is only from grades 9 to 12. We're ignoring the middle school era where some of these patterns are actually really developed. So 60% of our students are going to face some serious intervention issues, to deal with tardiness before they graduate. And, massive numbers. Just since a lot of people just mentioned, the disruptions and things like that, think of the burden. If you're a high school administrator or educator, think of the burden that having to develop and manage, process, track, record intervention programs and processes for 60% of your students before they graduate. Huge, thousands of an uncalculatable number of hours. So, very, very important. This actually comes a lot to thinking about the processes that we have to put in place to manage these impacts. And when we talk about just graduation rates, but let's get into this. Um, so while this is especially post-COVID is where we've seen some of these numbers skyrocket very, very recently. It is very, very important because the graduation rate issue, we're going to just start seeing impacted from that huge increase of tardiness over the COVID sort of window, couple of years there. We're just going to start seeing those graduation rates become impacted right now. So huge issue facing on the graduation rate. And looking at it, coming into that second issue, manual processes will cause data errors, but also just are going to consume a huge amount of time. I saw lots of comments in there. Is if you think about just the process of a student coming late to campus and how many touch points in a typical school, and I mean, since we talked to thousands of high schools across the country, a very common process for this. This might not be your process, but this is a very common process. As students will come in, and if they're after the bell, then there'll be single point of entry. They'll come in through the front door. They'll check in at the attendance office or the front office. They will sign in as tardy with the front office administrator or attendance clerk, and that could be very often a manual process where their name is recorded on a spreadsheet or something like that, or it could be a number of different ways. Maybe they scan into the student information system. If you've got a little more advanced or a little more tech, then someone hand writes them a tardy pass so that they can go to class. So they've had one or two touch points right there. Then they wander around the hallway because now that they've got this pass, it's their permission to wander around the hallway and be late. So they meander around the hallway and maybe run into one or two more people who help usher them to class. Then they get into class. The class stops for them coming in as they have to hand the teacher a note. The teacher takes a look at the note. The student takes a seat, completely disruptive. There are, minutes of time per student for 3, 4, 5, or 6 people, administrators and teachers and potentially other staff through that entire process. On top of that, these handwritten passes are prone and subject to error and fraud. The process of recording them at the front desk is prone and error to fraud. And if they're, let's say in the least touch environment, they come into the school, they go to the classroom, directly to the classroom and just come in tardy. The problem there is, of course, now the teacher needs to record that tardy in the attendance book. That's very disruptive to class if they have to stop instruction and go do it in real time. Most teachers don't do that because how disruptive it is. So now they're, maybe trying to write their name down or trying to remember for later, or let's be honest, maybe they just stopped taking attendance at the beginning of class because they're tired of having to go and make so many updates for tardies. And so they just start taking attendance later in class. That has obviously a very significant impact on the accuracy of the attendance they're taking. We're starting to miss a lot of lates and miss a lot of tardies. And now we don't even know the seriousness or volume of the problem because it's simply not being recorded anymore. And all of these processes consume time, burn a lot of hours, take a lot of emotional energy from everyone along the way, and have huge accuracy issues. So, just getting right out of the gate, even identifying and having the data to understand this problem is a huge issue and a barrier to our regular education environment, and a direct opposite of providing a positive, community-based learning environment. So that's just talking about manual processes right now. And as we dive into the other, the next part is, of course, we're starting to talk a little bit about the disruption that this has in the classroom. The impact that this has on the classroom is so much more than just the disruption. of course, the disruption, if the teacher's trying to, get into the flow of teaching, students are trying to get into the flow of learning. And of course, our highest volume of tardies is during period one, is the beginning of school, when everyone is trying to, get out of sleep mode, get into school mode, get into learning mode, and everything else like that. That is when this is having the biggest impact on our classroom. So right out of the gate, of course, very disruptive to classroom instruction. It's going to interrupt the teacher. It's going to, interrupt students. It's very distracting. We all know, and getting worse in today's world, that once we lose attention, it takes, 5 to 10 minutes to bring attention back. So that we're starting with that. But let's talk about the emotional impact that this has in the big picture of tardiness. And I think, in discussion and reading a lot of very good research on this from a lot of very amazing people, and we have a ton of additional resources appended to the end of this presentation that we'll provide to everyone as well. Students strolling in late to class, very casually, chronically, and in large volume, has one very big impact that is hard to quantify, but very, very real. And that is, it sends a message to not only the teacher, but also the other students that are there on time, that their time is not important, that the instruction's not important, that what we're all doing here today is not important. And this message, delivered on an everyday basis, I believe very strongly, and a lot of research is showing, is one of the primary drivers in the declining job satisfaction or satisfaction of experience that our teachers are having in education today. Because if that's the message, think about any other relationship that you were in. Think about if you had a friend that every time you showed up, to meet that friend for coffee, to do whatever with that friend, for me to go mountain biking, whatever, that they were 10 minutes late every time. And very nonchalant about it, just like la-di-da, strolling up 10 minutes late every single time. And no matter how you tried to manage that, it didn't make any difference. It just showed up late every time. Eventually, most people, unless that friend's a really good mountain biker, most people would end that friendship, or you just stop spending time with them. Because emotionally, that would continue to send you a message that your time's not valuable. You being here is not valuable. And, everybody's late sometimes. But all the time, repeatedly, over and over again, that is a very, very devastating and very hard thing to manage. And this circles around into, we won't cover it in detail today, but why a clear, concise, and well-communicated framework around tardiness, a discipline framework, and a process around managing tardiness is so important. It is not, the importance of it is not to fix tardiness. We need to just sit back and all take a big breath, maybe look over to your neighbor on your left and your right and have a hug, and realize that we're not going to fix tardiness. Tardiness will not fix. What we need to understand, and we're certainly not going to fix it with a progressive discipline framework. That is not going to solve the problem. It is going to help. It is going to reduce tardiness, but it's not going to fix it. But a clear and concise and well executed and consistently executed discipline framework and structure and process around tardiness sends a message back to our staff and to our students that are there that their time is important. And it's important enough that we're going to manage and deliver a clear and consistent process around tardiness. That's how important it is to us. That's how important it is to the administration team that's here at the school, is we are going to prioritize this as something that's very important. Well knowing, without the expectation that it fixes our tardiness problem, it will help manage it. But that it's because we value your time enough to tackle this problem head on. So that classroom disruption, now that isn't just a teacher issue as well, because if you think about it, this impacts the students that are there on time as well. And when we're already working hard to get, to drive student engagement, to create a sense of community and belonging on our campuses, that message to those students that their time is not important either is also, in a direct, opposite of the type of community and culture we're trying to build on campus. So there is some incredible reading. I'm going to reference some of those on some research papers, some psychologist research papers on this that are also very recent. So that impact to our overall poor academic performance, both at the teacher, staff, and student level, is I would consider one of the most devastating impacts of chronic absenteeism and tardiness. So from the impact of the classroom, this is moving right into that extension, that 40, that, we're starting to lose a lot of teachers as well. And we're losing the best teachers, the teachers that care the most. If you care the most about your time there, then this impact, the emotional impact of chronic absenteeism and tardiness has the biggest impact on you. And interestingly enough, in these papers, it shows that tardiness is worse than absenteeism. If it's an absent student, it's not disruptive to class, and it doesn't enforce that your time's not an important issue for the teacher in the classroom. It's when the students are strolling in late on a regular basis that it has a bigger impact. Of course, absenteeism still has an impact on it as well, but not as big as tardiness when it comes to those emotional, job satisfaction elements. So, I mean, 40% of teachers strongly agree that tardiness has a negative impact on their teaching. We're seeing an 8 to 12% turnover rate across the country right now in public education. So, huge numbers. And of course, that's also not just teachers, but that's also impacting administration. As someone that works with, thousands of high schools and middle schools across the country, I can tell you firsthand how much turnover we're seeing in administration from just the people that we're working with at the schools that we work with across the country. So huge impact in turnover. And of course, we see that number double when we get into Title I schools. And not shockingly, as our socioeconomic, indicators change, we also see changes in absenteeism and chronic tardiness. So we do see, while we talk to most schools are struggling with absenteeism and tardiness that we talk to in every demographic, as we move into Title I environments, we are seeing those numbers increase, as well as our turnover rates and things like that increase as well. Yvonne is saying, let's see, but when students aren't in class, it's a huge burden, often impossible to get the students caught up. 100%, Yvonne. Like, I am not saying that absent students don't have an impact. They have a huge impact as well. It's a little bit of a different impact, of course, and it's a work impact. It's the students missing that education, then it's trying to catch them up for tests, and that's obviously having a long-term impact on graduation. I was purely just talking about that emotional, indicator in the classroom in real time, that absenteeism and tardiness are a little bit different in how they impact that way. But 100% absenteeism and tardiness, overall big picture, are, absenteeism is probably a bigger issue overall in the big picture for exactly those reasons you're talking about. This long-term absenteeism will have a devastating rate on graduation rates and, academic performance. So, and from there, as we cycle through all those problems, that ends up at the end of the day, that now this does take a couple of years for the cycle to catch up from the funding perspective. But as we see tardiness increase, and then that leads to increased absenteeism. And then from increased absenteeism, we're getting into, lost instruction hours, and then the reporting of those instruction hours up to state, and then up to Fed, and overall how that has an impact on most of our funding, our public funding sources and recurring funding sources within private and public education. And right now we're starting to see that schools are starting to have a notable impact on funding reduction directly related to this. This is all, of course, you can see absenteeism and tardiness rates as reported by the National Center for Education Statistics. So this is easy data to go take a look at, and you can see how much it's been climbing over the last little while. And they do extrapolated reports on funding impacts as well. So there's some, and also some great reports that are included right in here. So that's a quick summary, a quick dive in to those 5 ways that we see tardiness impacting schools in 2024. Declining graduation rates, just the overall process and labor time that's involved in managing this, the disruptions in the classroom from tardiness and absenteeism, then the impact that's having on our teachers and our staff and our administration as we continue to lose teachers at that 8+% rate across the country, and then overall how that starts to impact funding as a whole. I'd like to take a moment, and I know we have I purposefully left some time because I'd love to have a little discussion. So first off, real quick, after post this conversation as we've talked about it, I'm curious first on, and we'll use the chat here a little bit as well. If you could just throw into chat, tell me a little bit, are you seeing the impact in your talent on campus? Are you seeing teachers leaving? Are you seeing job dissatisfaction and talking to teachers about job dissatisfaction? And I'm also curious, I'm seeing some yeses in there right away, on have you seen anything or experienced anything that's helped make a positive impact to date? Doesn't need to be a long explanation, just throw something in. But I'd really love to understand if anyone's done something to help make an impact. And right out of the gate, I would like to understand if you've done something to make a positive impact on your social and emotional space with your staff and your teachers and your administration team. What have you been able to do that has a positive impact with that? Anybody have anything off the top of their head? Yeah, Corey mentions a lot of teachers not staying consistent with school policies. Huge issue, Corey. I mean, and it's a snowballing issue too, because if we're not staying consistent with policies, then of course we don't understand what the problem is. The problem continues to get bigger, and we don't even really know it because we don't have the data to manage it. Problem only find it was the same at a new district. Yeah, I mean, Charles, that's if they're staying in education. And of course, what we're seeing is a lot of teachers leaving the education industry as a whole. So, which is a bigger issue because, if they're staying in education, at least we still have the staff, but when we're already in an underserved, industry and understaffed industry, if they're leaving the industry, especially teachers with experience and our best teachers, that's a huge impact. So 100%. So one thing, and this is brought up, but if I could make one suggestion, a take home that you could do the next time you're at a staff meet, you have your staff meeting, that will have a very big positive impact, is take 15 minutes of your staff meeting and open up the conversation. Right now, this is such an insurmountable problem that while it is talked about a ton, it is usually talked about in a negative way. It's done via complaints. It's done being like the exacerbation of the problem. It's done in the coffee room. It's a problem we talk about in a way that people need to get this off this chest. Teachers need to get off this chest. Everyone else, but it's not talked about often in a constructive and supportive way. and an opportunity for you as administrators, or even as a staff member that wants to take a lead, a teacher that wants to take a lead in the staff meeting, is open up the conversation and just say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. Is anyone else feeling like this? Like, this is how this is impacting me. And I just want to talk about that. I don't need to complain about the tardiness. Like, we have lots of time to do that. I just want to open up the conversation that this is the way that I'm feeling. Because right now, a lot of people, a lot of staff, a lot of teachers, and a lot of administrators are feeling very, very alone in those feelings. Because nobody's really opening up that conversation and feeling, oh, this is really making me feel like my time's not valued. Like I'm not valued in this situation. As opposed to like just pissed off. Because we all know that we're frustrated and angry. But opening up that conversation, you know, and of course, we all know that when you have negative emotions, or like those, I don't want to call them negative, they're emotions are all our emotions for a good reason. But when we have those emotions that we struggle with, when they are made 10 times worse when we feel like it's in isolation and when we feel like we're alone with them. So if you can open up that conversation as a constructive conversation you can have with the bulk of your staff, that's actually going to have a really positive improvement, and also open up the conversation for constructive ways to start to manage this. And when we have our teachers bought in and we bring that community sense of community back to our staff, it also means that we will get more support when we bring in processes and systems to manage the problem. Because now we are doing it from a foundation of community and connection within our staff and our administrative teams, as opposed to isolation. And so that's going to have a huge positive impact on the overall process. Just start with a conversation. From there, there are a couple things, you know, to look at right out of the gate. Almost, it's funny how many schools that I'll talk to the principal and I'll say, what's your progressive discipline framework for tardies? And they're like, we don't have one. And then we go and Google it on the website, and of course there is one, because it's been written 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it was. There's something posted somewhere that's a progressive discipline framework on tardiness or absenteeism, and how we manage that. And there are very often like a 12-step process, and they're extremely complicated. So once we start with a conversation, the next thing is we need to think of I call it the 3 C's of all processes that we should be using on campus, at work, wherever. The 3 C's. Number 1 is clarity. The process needs to be clear. And in order for it to be clear, it's got to be simple. So take a look at whatever your progressive discipline framework is and simplify it down to the bare minimum and necessities. And we have a lot of samples and best practices, tardy frameworks available on our knowledge base and in our best practices guides. And you don't need to be a Minga customer to use them. All that content is openly available to everyone. Start with something super, super simple, because super simple is going to be very, very clear. And super simple comes into the next C. Super simple means that it is very easy to keep consistent. And like many processes on campus, if you truly want consistency, you have to move it out of the classroom. We cannot, if you have 1,500 students and 100 teachers at any given moment doing something, you cannot expect consistency if it's being delivered independently or managed independently by 100 different staff. So look for ways. For example, if you don't do single point of entry in the morning, excuse me, after the bell rings, go to single point of entry, because it's going to be way easier. Since the bulk of our tardiness, say, to start with, is period ones, it's going to be way easier to manage a consistent process if it's all done in the front office and taken out of the classroom. So first, clarity, then consistency, and third, well communicated. Find the ways to communicate this effectively. Make sure it is included very clearly for all students. We have some students or some schools that do, you know, very cool things. They have every student sign an absenteeism and a tardiness policy at the beginning of the year, and a commitment policy at the beginning of the year that clearly outlines the stuff. It gets sent home to families. Maybe you get a family signature as well. Have it posted, like front office, places where people come in on a regular basis. Ensure that your processes are well communicated. That is our time for today. I see another, there's a question from an anonymous attendee, maybe Sep or May, can you just jump on that question there? Excuse me. So I'm Jason from Minga. Minga is a campus management platform. We look at all of the, what I like to call the death by paper, death by spreadsheet, and death by hour processes that make up your day-to-day campus every day. And we look to, replace them with efficient, effective, clear, and consistent processes and systems and paperless and through our digital platform called Minga. This is a topic that we spend a lot of time working on at every end, from how we check students in tardy in the morning or in between periods, to automating progressive discipline frameworks and notifications and communication, and even checking detention and everything else in between, to make these very clear, consistent, well-documented processes with an emphasis on accountability and efficiency. So happy to continue this conversation for everyone. Really appreciate you all being here and spending some time with me this morning and talking about this topic. We will continue to talk about this topic all year long. So this was one of our introductions into this. Really great to see great conversations and discussions happening as well. And we'll be facilitating some more of those community conversations and discussions, going forward too. So
Jason,
good luck tackling this problem right now. We're happy to help. And May, go ahead. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say before we go about your continuing the conversation, I'm just wondering if you wanted to launch that poll, because I can't do it for you for some reason. So we'd love to hear what you all want to keep learning about to make sure we bring as much value to these webinars as possible. So if you don't mind taking a minute or so just to answer this while you leave, that would be fantastic.
Oh, thank you for the reminder, May. I totally would
Yeah,
have
no worries. No problem.
Everyone, I just launched that poll up as there as well. So if you would take just 2 seconds to fill out that poll on your way out. You can reach us at www.minga.io and also at hello@minga.io if you wanted to send us an email. But there are lots of content and things available up. If you look under our solutions section, under tardiness and absenteeism, there's a whole whack of content. And of course, we will send this presentation out to everyone after the call, because there's a bunch of links available on the last slide here as well, to some of the content we referred to, but also just some great research and some great papers to help us tackle this problem. So thank you very much, everyone, for all your time this morning, and have a wonderful Tuesday.